nerderotic.com.
Greetings, everyone. Gary here. In the spirit of Release the Snyder Cut, we are going to release the Zicree cut. Yes, this interview should have been out months ago. We had a lot of problems in between now and then, including the beer bug, some family drama, and the video completely disappearing. Now, I was able to get some audio. That's it. It's not the best audio in the world, but it's not the worst. So we have something. Unfortunately, this doesn't help Marc Zicree, so I apologize because this Kickstarter campaign is now over. But if you can go give him a subscription over at Mr. Sci-Fi, go check out his channel. It's very good, very insightful. He does reviews of Westworld, of Star Trek. He gives you the behind the scenes on Space Command. Yeah, Space Command, his TV show. You know that thing we've been asking for, just good old-fashioned sci-fi with no political agenda, but it can still have a message in it. That's what this is. And it is crowd-funded. The best way to do it nowadays, and that is the future, and I think Marc is paving the way. Now, he is a number one hustler in the right way, and that's why he succeeds in Hollywood, because good guys don't finish last all the time, and he is a good guy, and he knows how to work Hollywood in the right way without screwing people over. And he's just genuine, and I think that's why so many people like him. This is a first-generation nerd. He knows his Star Trek. God, I wish he was running Star Trek. But he's not. He's running Space Command, and he probably has a lot more control over it. It's probably a much better situation. He seems pretty happy. So, man, I wish him all the luck in the world, and if there's another Kickstarter, I will certainly support it financially, and I will shout it out, and I will continue to shout out Space Command. So let's get to the interview. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you afterwards. I wanted to ask you, basically, like Space Command, when did that start formulating in your head, and how did that come to be?
The initial impetus for it was in 2012, because back then there was a period where TV had gotten very, very dark, and science fiction in particular, the movies and the TV shows tended to be very dystopic and very hopeless, and I grew up with Star Trek, and so I wanted to create something that had a hopeful vision of the future, something that said, like Star Trek did, that we could reach across boundaries and barriers, that we mustn't give in to fear, and that we can create a future worth living in. And I think that TV has an incredible power to inspire. And certainly I wouldn't be a writer if not for Twilight Zone and Star Trek and Outer Limits when I was a kid. And so I run a roundtable of writers and directors and actors and producers. It's several thousand people. We meet every Thursday, and it's all across the country now. And I started hearing about crowdfunding because a lot of my friends are showrunners, and they wanted to team with me and take Space Command into the networks to pitch it. And we could have easily gotten a pilot deal, but then they could have cut me off at script or cut me off at pilot, and the audience would never see it, because having written so much for television over the years, I knew that some of the best shows never see the light of day. And so I thought, no, let's see if my audience will bankroll me to shoot the 2-hour pilot, because then I'm in a direct conversation with the audience. And they did. So far my audience has given me over $1 million, and we've shot the first 3 hours of Space Command. We're about to shoot the fourth in a few weeks. We're going to shoot the entire 12-hour season this year. We're launching a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter on Sundays, so it just keeps going. But it was basically, I'm the same as my audience. I'm the same as you. I mean, I can identify most of the things behind you because I own most of them. The action figures and the Daleks and that Blade Runner button. They gave that out when Blade Runner first debuted, and I've got the exact same one on my shelf in my office. So, and the Howard the Duck button, I've got that one too. So, so I'm the same as my audience, but I'm not the same as the network executives, because they're working for a corporation. Their bottom line is they have to be productive. And productive means not artistic productivity. It means financial productivity. So so it doesn't matter if the show is good or bad or indifferent. If it turns a profit, if it makes money for the parent corporation, that's what success, and that's how they rise. And that's not a bad thing. That's just what their job is. The problem is that it can often work against the instincts of the artist, and can stymie the best material getting to the audience. So that's where we began the journey, and then our first campaign raised $221,000, and then I had to spend a couple of years building a studio, and because with Space Command, as opposed to all the other shows I'd written for, where there was an infrastructure in place, like when I was a producer on Sliders, I didn't have to build the machine. The machine was already there, and I just had to utilize that machine. But with Space Command, I had to build everything from the ground up. And so that took up a couple of years, and then we rolled camera, and we've been shooting ongoingly since about 2014. And now we're at a point where we can start putting out what we've been shooting and continue shooting and build from there, because I'm not just doing Space Command, I'm creating 6 other series also. And with Rockne O'Bannon and Mark Ferguson, a number of people who've created some of the great
Oh,
science fiction.
love
Yeah.
Rockney. Oh,
Yeah.
that's exciting. That's really
Well,
exciting. Um,
well,
oh, sorry,
well,
go ahead.
yeah. No, I was just going to say, I came up with an idea called the Showrunners Network, where I'm creating 6 shows with 6 major science fiction showrunners, and we're going to take that out to our audience to finance all 6 pilots, and we'll then take it as a slate of 6 shows to the VOD platform. So Rock and I are now writing the pilot for the first one. It's called Sweet Haven, and it stars Robert Picardo, Mira Furlan, Mike Harney from Orange is the New Black and Project Blue Book, Barbara Bain from Space 1999 and Mission Impossible. I've written a role for George Takei. I've written another role for Nana Visitor and another for Gates McFadden. I have to take them to lunch and run it all by them in terms of the specifics. But it's a great show, and we're going to shoot it in the next few months. So it's it's great fun.
No, it's you're really on the cutting edge of this, Mark, and I attribute this the way I came across your channel. It wasn't because of the book. I had just come across Mr. Sci-Fi, and I started. I love the cut of your jib, and I'm like, this guy's a real nerd. He's like, and I mean that in the most complimentary way. You are first
Yeah.
generation,
No,
and
I take it as a compliment. I mean, absolutely, because I'm not, I'm not cynical. I'm not jaundiced. I'll tell you how Mr. Sci-Fi came into existence. I was having lunch a couple of years ago with Glenn Mazzara, who had been the showrunner on Walking Dead, and before that, he was the executive producer of The Shield. And he said, you know so much about science fiction, you should have your own channel. So I thought, well, sure, because Space Command is a very long-term project, a very difficult project that's very expensive and, takes everything I've got. But I'd previously been a commentator on Morning Edition on National Public Radio, and that was very easy. I would just talk for 3 minutes on the radio, and that was that. But so I said, okay, let's make this simple, where I just turn my phone on myself and post it on my YouTube channel, and that's it. And it's grown where we now have millions of hits and thousands of subscribers, and it's fun. And I post about once a week, sometimes twice, and it's just great fun. But I had lunch with Glenn last week because I think Glenn and I are talking about him coming aboard the Showrunners Network also, and but I owe him all Mr. Sci-Fi's thanks to him. So I was very grateful to him.
no, it's great. It's great to see because it's the future, and this is how we're going to get better content because of. I mean, you may or may not know I've been very critical of a lot of stuff, and I don't like the direction a lot of shows are going because of the nihilism that's
Yes.
going on. I know there's some stuff that's great, that's really good. I think
Yeah.
TV is the future. I think
Yeah.
the overarching story, Game of Thrones, and I still think that's the future, and we still get some very, very good stuff out there. But
Yeah.
God, can we just get some fun, inspirational
I,
storytelling? And that's
I
what
know.
Space Command is. So I
That's right.
thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Gary. But again, it's really lovely to envision something and then make it happen. There's 900 visual effects shots in the first hour and another 900 in the second hour, and it's a 12-hour season made up of 2-hour stories that form a larger arc. And it's lovely. It's very liberating when you don't have to ask permission, because the moment you decide you're gonna do something and you're not going to ask others to make it happen or ask them, whatever, then it just becomes logistics of how do I do this rather than whether I'm going to do it. And the moment you just really just commit to it, then all sorts of possibility opens up. So I'm really happy about that.
I am too, and I love seeing it, and I will support this like crazy on my channel. You have my promise, and it will be
Thank you.
continued. Because it's weird the times we're in where it's flipped around, where the underground stuff used to be the darker, edgier stuff, and now that's the norm. And if we want to have something that's just fun, you got to go out and do it on your own. And great,
Yeah,
because that's
but
what more
yeah.
people are going to have to do.
Well, I think also, I think people who do things that are positive can risk being accused of being Pollyanna or
Yeah.
rose-colored glasses, just naive, and the cynics view themselves as being realists, quote unquote. I don't agree at all.
Yep.
I think that cynicism, John Sayles, who's a wonderful writer-director, once said, cynicism is cowardice, and I agree with that. I think that people forget that Star Trek debuted during the Vietnam War, during the race riots. I mean, the cities were burning, and yet Roddenberry had the courage to say, we can do better, we can be more. And millions of people around the world were inspired by this and became scientists and teachers and raised loving families and understood his philosophy of inclusivity. And I think now more than ever we need that. And it's not naive. I think there's only one thing that can be a counterweight to evil, and that's love. You know, light banishes darkness. You cannot fight darkness with more darkness. And you know, that's something that Martin Luther King mentioned, and he was right. And you know, my life is about compassion, and that doesn't mean that you can't tell a dramatic story. You can, obviously, but it means that you believe what you're saying, and I think that has a ripple effect too.
It really does. I think that's the best way to get your message across. That's why Star Trek got its message across to all sides of the aisle, to so many different
Yeah.
people, because it told
Yeah.
that story with a compassion behind it and an empathy. And you know, that's not. I mean, there's still shows doing that. It's not every
Yes.
show. You know, and we'll talk about Star Trek in a little bit, but
They ask about this stuff. Yeah.
yeah, because you know, I'm just coming off of watching Star Trek Picard last night.
Me too.
But I have a new appreciation for what you do and what you guys do. And listen, when I'm critical, I do not get
Yeah.
critical of crew members or writers, or you know, well, writers maybe, but not crew members. I walked the set of the Orville. I had the privilege of walking the set of the Orville while they were shooting, and I saw the
Yeah.
size of those sets, and I saw how much work goes into it, and
Yeah.
how I mean, the fact that you're doing this on your own
Yes.
is, I cannot believe you're doing that, but that is great, and
And it's going to get just bigger. I mean, literally, I came directly from a meeting with my art department and my one of my producers, and we're about to shoot the fourth hour of Space Command. So we're building an alien hibernation ship. We're building two 8 foot tall creatures. I mean, it's continuing, and then I was laying out where the show goes from there. And you know, and my my head of my art department, he's worked on Men in Black, he's worked on Star Trek Beyond, and so forth. And you know, and then I got a phone call from Ian McCaig, who's designing one of our characters. He's our character designer on all of Space Command, and you know, he designed Darth Maul and Queen Amidala and Rey in The Force Awakens, and you know, Thanos and the Josh Brolin Thanos and so forth. He's one of the leading character designers in Hollywood, and yet he works for me because we're friends, and he's excited about what I'm doing and what I stand for. So, you know, it's but when we ramp up, when we're in full production, there might be 100 people on our set, and every one of them is vital, you know,
yeah.
and there's no dead weight, and also the reason the actors are working with me, people like Bob Picardo and Mira Furlan and Bill Mumy and so forth, and you know, are is because they love what we're doing. They're Doug Jones, you know. I mean, I met Doug when I was writing the book with Guillermo del Toro, and I just said, you have this amazing soul, and I'm going to write a role that shows the audience that soul. And this is before Star Trek Discovery hired him, you know. And but I said, I'm going to show your face because he has this amazing sensitive face that they always cover up. And I thought, no, you're not going to have to wear foam rubber this time.
No, oh my God, I love Doug Jones so much. I've
Yeah.
met him a couple times at a con when he was promoting Fantastic Four
Yes.
and Hellboy 2. But
Yes.
oh, I'm so happy they let him use his voice in Hellboy 2. And really one of the nicest people I've ever seen when it comes to interacting with fans.
Yeah. He's
He,
really cool.
yeah, he's a good soul. He will sit there, and I mean, he spent time like 15 minutes talking to me with people in line. It was great. It was great.
Yeah, he's really one of a kind, and you know, it's but again, you find people who have a good heart, and you surround yourself with those people, and it makes your life much more pleasant.
It really does. It really
Yeah.
does. I'm just looking at your body of work here, just on IMDb, and it's beyond impressive. And I'm speaking to the people who will be potentially in the audience if you're not
Yeah.
aware. And I have an intro recorded for you as well, but you know, like I've watched your Incredible Hulk cartoon. You've worked on He-Man, the Smurfs, the oh my God, the Get Along Gang, Pole
Yeah.
Position. That's so funny. Pole Position,
Yeah. That's
uh,
fun.
and Captain Power and the real Ghostbusters. That is an I mean, just alone, that is one of my
Yeah.
favorite all-time cartoons. And you did a lot of episodes.
Yeah,
Uh,
it was really fun. Well, because what happened was, Ghostbusters came out and we all loved it. All of us who were writing cartoons at that point, I never intended to write animation, but I wanted to write for science fiction TV. And so my friend Michael Reeves was writing animation. He brought me in. This is while I was writing the Twilight Zone Companion. And and I rose very quickly. I became the god of animation and then jumped over to live action with Captain Power and Star Trek: The Next Generation and so on. But the way it worked was we were all in our 20s and early 30s. And what we do is we all of us would be writing all of the different shows, and we were writing very, very quickly. But with Real Ghostbusters, the movie came out. We all loved it. We were all science fiction geeks. And then Joe Straczynski, who was a friend of mine, he became story editor, and he said to us, "Let's just write it as though we're writing sequels to the movie." And the movie wasn't even out on home video yet. The studio gave us a VHS tape so we could just watch the movie and get it into our skin, get it under the skin. And then we just wrote whatever the hell we wanted. We were writing it as an adult show. Basically, we were entertaining ourselves. And I think that really shows in the quality of the work.
oh, it does. I mean, Ghostbusters fans consider it canon, and
Yes.
it's just as much a part of the fandom as the original film,
Yeah.
and that's the way I see it too.
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
oh yeah, you wrote one of the best Deep Space Nine episodes like ever, and one that could, I mean, plays well today. And
Mm.
I feel Deep Space Nine, and I hear this. One of the great things about what I do is I'm on a live stream almost daily. I get to talk
Yeah.
to fans daily. I get to hear feedback. The one thing
Cool.
across the board is Deep Space Nine has aged probably the best out of all, even more than TNG in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. And your episode is amazing.
Thank
Can you give a little
Well,
background on that?
of course. Well, I'm very, very proud of Far Beyond the Stars. I love it, and it's fascinating because when I was a kid, as I mentioned, Twilight Zone and Star Trek and The Outer Limits were my inspiration, and I started to notice that many of the same writers were not only writing for those shows, they were also writing the books and the short stories I was reading. Theodore Sturgeon and Harlan Ellison and Ray Bradbury and on and on. Dorothy Fontana, David Gerald, and um, and so and Theodore Sturgeon, when I was a teenager, the great Theodore Sturgeon, who'd written Amok Time and Shore Leave for Star Trek, the original Star Trek, became my friend and mentor. And so when DS9 came along, I wanted to pay tribute to the writers, the science fiction writers of the 1950s who were writing for a penny a word, who were writing for the love of it, because I realized that the audience didn't know that history, and you wouldn't have Star Trek or Star Wars if not for those guys like Ted Sturgeon, like Heinlein and Asimov and so forth, who were writing for the love of it back then and creating the world we live in. And so that was the initial idea, the initial notion of it. I wanted to pay homage to them. And then I pitched it, and it took Hans Beimler a solid year to convince Ira Bear to buy it. And by then I was a producer on Sliders, and I was writing 2 episodes back to back. And so, but Far Beyond the Stars, we all met on my lunch hour at Nicodell's, which was a restaurant next to Paramount, and it was the entire writing staff of DS9. So it was Ira Bear, Ron Moore, Hans Beimler, Richard Manning, just everybody. I think Brian Fuller was there, and David Weddle and his partner. I mean, just astonishing. All of these guys became showrunners. All these guys went off and created the shows that we all love since, like Battlestar Galactica, etc. And so we started talking about it, and it evolved to being about Cisco and about race, very specifically. And I was thrilled. I just thought it was just absolutely terrific to be able to write something so meaningful. And we all knew that it was going to be a landmark. We knew that it was going to be one of the great Star Trek episodes of all time. And because whenever I went to pitch to Star Trek, because I also came up with First Contact, the episode for Next Gen, and every time I would pitch to Star Trek, I would think, what haven't they done? What's meaningful and profound that opens up the Star Trek envelope wider? And because City on the Edge of Forever had changed my life, Amok Time was unlike anything that TV had ever done, etc. Week after week on the original Star Trek, they were, expanding what TV could do and could be. And so that weekend, I wrote the outline for Far Beyond the Stars, And one of my advisors in creating the backstory and creating the world was Harlan Ellison. Now, Harlan, interestingly enough, was extremely embittered against Star Trek because of what happened with City on the Edge of Forever, how thoroughly they rewrote him. And so he wouldn't, in fact, when I did World Enough in Time, the Sulu episode that I did for Star Trek New Voyages, he liked me, but he wouldn't come see that episode because he was so embittered against Star Trek. But when I was working on Far Beyond the Stars, I called him and I said, I'm doing this episode for DS9 that's going to go back to the 50s and really show what that was like. And I asked him a whole bunch of questions, and he answered them. And I said, were there any black writers who were writing under white pseudonyms? And he told me about one writer that he knew that had been, and what that life was like. And so I just so he was a big inspiration on that. And then I remember also that when we were shooting it, I wanted to go on the set, and they were actually shooting one of my episodes of Sliders that same week. And I'd actually written a role for Armin Shimmerman in my episode of Sliders that he couldn't do because it was overlapping with Far Beyond the Stars. So both studios were shooting my work the same day. So I got photos with both casts on both sets at two different studios the same day with me in the same clothes, and it was phenomenal. And I went on the set, and it was the magazine office set. So that was at Paramount, and I hadn't met Avery Brooks yet. He was directing the episode, of course, and I was very close friends with Armin Shimmerman, still am, and but Avery was looking at me, and he was directing a scene, and then he was kind of looking at me, wondering who I was, and then he said, "Okay, everybody, let's break for lunch." And I walked up to him and I said, "Hello, Mr. Brooks, I'm Marc Zicree. I came up with this story," and he said, everybody, stop." And he put his arm around me and said, "Say to them what you just said to me." And I said, "I came up with this story." And he said, "He came up with this story." And he started applauding me, and everyone started applauding me. And
Oh.
it was great. And then a couple of years ago, it was I guess the 20th anniversary of DS9 or whatever, and they at the Las Vegas convention, they screened Far Beyond the Stars, and I was on the panel with all the writers and the actors, and Ira Bear and everyone from the cast. And what was astonishing to me was, because I hadn't seen it in a number of years, and we were back in the green room behind the stage. We were waiting to go on, and it was so interesting because they were screening the episode for the audience, and it was also on a monitor backstage. Now, normally in the green room, everyone's walking around and talking to each other and making phone calls to their agent or whatever and ignoring what's on screen. When I went in, that episode of DS9 was on Far Beyond the Stars. You could hear a pin drop. Everyone was watching it, not just the DS9 cast, but the Star Trek Discovery cast, because they'd never heard of this episode.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just astonished. And the scene where the cops kill, the actor who played, Sisko's son, and Sisko says he wasn't armed. He was just, trying to break into a car, and they shot him. They killed him, the two New York cops. And they said, well, he had a weapon, a crowbar. And they said, and he said, you just committed murder. And this is when Black Lives Matter was in the news, and very much in the news. And to see that moment in Deep Space Nine 2 decades later and realize how astonishingly current its message still was, and have a TV show say, you're right, cops kill unarmed black people, and to have something that bold on a show made by a major studio and shown on a major network, phenomenal. And so it was a great honor, and in fact I got to reunite with a number of the actors from DS9 and also talk to some of the Discovery guys, the Star Trek Discovery cast. And so I'm going to be utilizing a number of those actors in Space Command and also in the other shows I'm creating now. So it's amazing. But we all feel part of the continuity of science fiction, and we all feel that we have a very direct conversation with our audience. And I love the fact it's a two-way conversation now, because when I started, there was no internet, so it was mainly you get a letter every now and then, maybe see someone at a convention, but that was about it.
Yeah, it's the new era. There's a little video I love to go back to. It's morbid, but Douglas Adams was a hero of mine, and his very last interview was here in San Francisco shortly before his very untimely death. And the guy was a prophet practically. Now, he would always naysay it, but somebody asked him about the future of entertainment, and even back then he said these little devices we have are gonna bring interaction back to entertainment. And he said we have been detached for so long in the 20th century with with record albums and cassette tapes and being on the other
Yeah,
side of a television. And, back
right.
before that, you could hear directly from your audience, and we're getting that now.
Yes.
And Hollywood is having to adapt to it. And I think you are a great example of positively adapting to that, reaching
Yes.
out to fans because you
Yes.
are a fan, you understand fandom. You've seen, and it's been kind of a thesis on my channel. Hollywood's had a very hard time figuring out fandom since they decided to, since genre became the
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems with Hollywood is its arrogance, and in its arrogance, it views fans as consumers. And I think you have to come to the fan base with humility and confidence in what you're creating. But it's conversation, as you say, and people recognize authenticity. This is the big difference between the old days and the new. Now, authenticity is what builds a fan base. I think when people watch me on Mr. Sci-Fi or in this interview or anywhere, if they meet me on the street, I'm authentic. I'm speaking from the heart. I'm not saying anything I don't mean. And so as a result, that's why people have been sending me money for Space Command. That's why people have been buying investment shares in Space Command, for $7,500 each. I mean, it's like I'm grateful to anyone who sends any money my way, or even an email that's flattering, that appreciates what I'm doing, because nobody has to either send me money or even waste their time reaching out to me. And anyone who responds to what I'm doing, that's why I'm doing it. I mean, I'm doing it to get something from my heart to the audience, and that's, I mean, Harlan Ellison, who was a brilliant man, temperamental man, but Harlan once said, you don't waste your audience's time. You have a great opportunity, a great honor. And if you're going to ask them to spend an hour of their time watching what you've come up with, make sure that it's meaningful and fresh and original. And I believe that very strongly.
And I could see that. And Harlan is a hero of mine, and I know he was temperamental, but he always, you know what, his heart was always in the right place.
It
He
was.
he actually helped a friend of mine, William Selby. He was a writer back. He wrote a Twilight Zone episode. He worked with Straczynski as well, and George R. R. Martin. He wrote the Helgramite method for in the second
Yeah.
series.
Yes.
He's a good friend of mine. I've known him for years.
Huh.
And the he's one of the people who taught me, because at the time, this will be a joke on my channel, but I used to own a comic book store for 10 years here in San Francisco. So I sold stories, and then part of my job was connecting a person to their story, because everyone has one. They have their
Yes.
own and one they connect with. And I never thought when I bought the store that it was that important. And it was Bill
Uh-huh.
who taught me
Uh,
the importance of stories and
yes.
mythology. And it was through that we started talking about Harlan. And that's why people want to help you, because we love, we're so
Yes.
lucky to live in this country we live in, and where we get to such great entertainment.
Yes.
And some gratitude once in a while is nice. And that's, I think, why
Yeah.
people are connecting with you.
Well, it's fun. I really love it. I keep telling people I would never go back to, 20, 30 years ago because, I mean, other than Space Command, other than World Enough in Time, the Sulu episode, everything I've done has been for the studios and the networks. I worked for all the major ones, hundreds of hours of television, but I wouldn't go back to that because I much prefer being in this relationship with my audience and having the conversation. And we had a spacesuit contest recently, and and anyone anywhere in the world could build a spacesuit and enter the contest, and we just used the winner's spacesuit in shooting a scene in Space Command. And we're going to have a poster contest soon, and the winners can get classic science fiction novels from the 50s, some of which are signed, and so forth. So it's like it's cool to be able to do that. And I think I love this. And but also it's funny, when you're talking about the continuity of science fiction, I mean, I was inspired by all those great writers, but then, when Joe hired me because all of us were, animation writers knew each other, Michael Reeves and Joe Straczynski and on. When Joe hired me for Real Ghostbusters and I wrote all those episodes, then I was hired to develop Captain Power as a series. And they wanted me to story edit it, and I was writing features at the time, so I couldn't. But I said, well, there's a guy you've never heard of. He's never done live action, but I'll guarantee him. And it was Joe Straczynski. I guaranteed him for that job. And then those two producers were the producers he ended up doing Babylon 5 with, Doug Netter and John Copeland. And so then he hired me to write an episode of Babylon 5, and thus it went. And so when I see Joe's name on something, or Michael Reeves, or any of the people I came up with, or I've also worked with George R. R. Martin and Ron Moore and so forth, we're all part of a club. And it's not, I don't mean that, it's like, people think Hollywood is a dog-eat-dog world. That has not been my experience. My experience is that we're rooting for each other. And for instance, when I was a producer on Sliders, I would reach out to Mike Okuda at Star Trek, and I say, "Do you have any like pseudo-scientific stuff on parallel worlds that I can kind of use to validate what I'm doing here?" And they'd fax me over stuff, and I'd use it. And we all knew each other, and we all liked each other. And I really loved that. I'm writing several books simultaneously. One of the ones I've just sold is called Greenlighting Yourself, and it talks about how anyone can do what I'm doing. And but also I've been writing, a memoir about my friendship with Ray Bradbury, and I'll be writing another memoir about my time with cartoons and all that, called My Televised Life. And so it's like, because I feel very honored to have worked with all these amazing people, and it continues. It's I mean, with Rock, Neil Bannon, we first met on the new Twilight Zone when we worked on that, and then Rock went on to create Farscape and Defiance and Alien Nation and Sequest, and now he's on Evil as the executive producer on CBS. But we're creating Sweet Haven, and the idea of Sweet Haven is simply there's a bioengineered disease that kills everyone in the world under 60, and so the people 60 and above have to save the world, and they can't reproduce. And so how do you do that?
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
it's a super fun idea. And then Mark Fergus, and his partner are doing The Expanse. They created that show for TV, and we're talking about doing a project called Fugitive Space that's about the military-industrial prison complex, but in the future with humans and an alien race. And it's yet another super fun thing. And I think the people I know admire the fact that I'm doing this, as you said, on my own without a net. I mean, and they're very interested in seeing this model and working in this model, because it's so much more fun, and we don't get screwed with. We don't have to. And there's no network notes. I write it, I cast it, I shoot it. It's like, it's great. And ultimately, and we're pitching this, to the networks and the VOD platforms. But the understanding then is, if you're on our wavelength, if you understand what we're doing, then yes, you can come aboard as our partners to distribute and promote, but you don't get to say what we make, and that's, I think, very powerful. But you have to mean it, and the way you mean it is by doing it.
Absolutely. And you're making something original. I completely believe in that. The artist should be absolutely free to do whatever the artist wants.
Yeah.
I feel a little differently when it comes to, I'm not hardcore on this, but when it comes to something with established canon, this will bring us to Star Trek.
They can drive it off a cliff. It's like, yeah, absolutely. That we can talk about Star Trek Discovery and Picard if you like. But go.
Yeah, I really love your reviews. I respect
Yes,
them a lot because of your perspective, and you can, I'm not a writer, so there's stuff I can't articulate when I review it, and that's why I try not to, I don't watch anybody's reviews before I do my own, but I go right to yours when they come out. The second they come out, I watch it, and what are your thoughts on Picard in particular lately?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. And again, to be clear, I'm not opposed to networks. I'm not opposed to VOD platforms. I'm not opposed to network executives. I mean, there are very good ones. I've worked with many good ones. Bonnie Hammer at USA Cable and Sci-Fi was terrific. But I also must admit that I heard the head of Sci-Fi, the head of the network back then, when I was doing Sliders. He said, I tried to watch that Babylon 5 and I just don't understand it. And Sliders, I watched that, I don't get it. And I thought, this guy's running a science fiction network. It's like, it's insane, right? But and so the problem with television, if you're doing it with a network or a network in a studio or whatever, is if you've got a good executive, they'll give you good notes and it'll make it better. But if they're not, you still have to address those notes. And sometimes you can come up with a solution that works, but other times they're just going to screw it up, So with Star Trek Discovery and Picard both, I think Star Trek Discovery's had a lot of problems because it's I think there's been a lot of war in the writers' room, and you can feel that kind of push-pull. Particularly in the first season, you felt that where two steps one way, then a step backwards, and where are we headed? What's the point of this? And then season 2 was all that crazy, Red Angel stuff, and it's like, okay, it's better incrementally, but again, you you're saying, what is the point of this, and how does it relate to the real world, to my life? Because I mean, I like Saru. I think Doug's doing a great job, but the reason I think Saru is probably the best character is because he's compassionate and selfless. And that there's a reason that heroes are heroic. And it's not, and you have to understand that to create your our job as writers in television, in fictional television, is to get the audience to care about people who don't exist. Spock is not real, Sherlock Holmes is not real, Superman is not real, but we get the audience to care about these characters. And the way you do that is you have them, you see inside their heart, and you care about them and about what they're doing and about what they're longing for. I mean, you bond with them, you know. And if you have characters who are just dog eat dog and out for themselves and self-protective and all that stuff, or if you're not clear on what they want or how then you just get muddled, you get lost, and you remain distanced from the characters. Now, Star Trek Picard, I think it's getting better. I mean, the 7 of 9 episode I liked. I just watched it this morning, in fact, at the gym while I'm running. And I've always liked Jerry Ryan. She's terrific. I met her when she was on the set of, on Star Trek Voyager. My friend Les Landau was directing one. I went on set. And she was, first of all, astonishing looking, but also, even back then, she was a great, wonderful actress. And so I think so far what they're doing with her and the way she's performing is very strong. Picard, they still haven't gotten Picard's character right. I mean, he's not the captain of that ship. He's not in a command position. He's not being as decisive as Picard normally would have been. It's just kind of like a carbon of a carbon, to use a very old phrase. It's kind of like faded, and they don't seem to quite get him. And then they have all these other characters, like, who are these people? Why should we care about them? And the logic of it is weird. And the Romulans, it's like, who the hell are the Romulans? I don't know who. I mean, I couldn't describe. Like, you can describe what a Klingon is and what they're like, and you can describe what a Vulcan is and what they're like. But with Romulans, in the original show, they were sort of like Romans. That's why they were called Romulans, and they had centurions and so forth, and they had a sense of honor. And it's like, and even with Enterprise Incident, the one with Joanne Linville and Spock having this kind of quasi relationship, it's like, okay, I can buy into those people. I get them. But ever since, the Romulans have become more and more nebulous until now. It's like, other than having pointed ears, who the hell are these people? It's like, why aren't they just humans? I don't get it. And so, but I'm willing to give it a chance. And I like Jerry Ryan, and I very much would love to work with her. I've been talking to Jonathan Frakes about being in some of the stuff I'm doing. I saw him a little while ago, and I said, "Are you still acting?" And he said, "If someone's asking," I said, "I'm asking." So I definitely would love to bring him aboard, and will be, absolutely. So so we'll see what happens. But that's my sort of thought about that. And then, of course, there's the JJ universe, the movies, and I thought he did some clever things in the first film. I thought he mostly pulled it off, but I think since then it's been diminishing returns. And the actors, of course, for them, it's just a gig. It's not like Shatner, Nimoy, and DeForest Kelley, where that was who they were to the audience, and it was meaningful, and they had an investment in the character over time. The actors who are in JJ's movies don't have that investment, and you feel that as it goes on from movie to movie. And now they're saying, will there be a fourth one? And I don't know, but we'll see. We'll see. It's a durable universe for Star Trek, and even if these ones aren't what we might want them to be, there will be one that comes along that will be. It just needs the right visionary, and you need someone who has something to say and who has something and has an understanding of how character works and can cast strong actors. Because again, if you cast actors who are kind of forgettable, that's problematical. And they keep casting someone with like shaggy black hair and a black beard and mustache. And there's 3 of them now. There's Spock in the 2nd season of Star Trek Discovery. And then there's a Romulan in Picard, and there's a human in Picard. And they all have the same haircut and the same beard. And it's like, well, if you put them in a police lineup, I'd say, well, I guess it's the same guy,
Paul McCartney.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
That's I've been super critical, and people on the channel
Yeah,
know how I feel about it. But I fundamentally everybody wants good Star Trek. They're rooting
yeah,
like hell, and they get frustrated.
yeah,
And you're right, though. Eventually, they'll get it right. Eventually, that'll happen. I think
yeah.
it'll be when they just are free to kind of go out on their own and move things forward, however they decide to do that. And there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes at CBS and Viacom. They just merged, and
Yes.
they're shifting employees and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always mention your name when I'm like, when somebody's all, well, who should take over? I'm like, oh, Mark Zicree, and Aaron
Yeah.
Shankar. Just my
Yeah.
top list
Yeah.
off the top of my
Yeah.
head. so so
I think Star Trek. Yeah, well, Star Trek: New Voyages, the Sulu episode really shows what I would do with Star Trek.
yes,
I mean, that's totally. I spent a year and a half on that, and I had final cut on it, and so Michael Reeves and I wrote it, and I directed it and executive produced it, and it was handmade pretty much. No studio, no network. You can watch it on Mr. Sci-Fi the entire hour. It was nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula. But that's what I would do with Star Trek. In fact, Michael and I worked up a Star Trek Captain Sulu series, and we actually pitched to CBS. We wrote the Bible. We outlined the 2-hour pilot. It would have been a great show. And but they weren't interested in doing a Captain Sulu show. And but again, when you were talking about darkness and dark views of things. That's the rabbit hole they always risk going down with the new Star Trek versions where it's increasingly bleak. And, it's problematical because, I mean, it was so interesting when Colonel Vindman, I guess that's his rank, testified in front of Congress and he said, this is America, right matters. And I think that's worth honoring and also looking toward in the fiction you create because it isn't a sliding scale of morality where everything goes. No, it's basically be kind, reach out to others, be a force for good in the world. And it's a really, for me, it's a very easy litmus test. With anything, I simply say, is this the compassionate decision? And if it's not, then I'm against it. And if it is, I'm for it. And, the roundtable I run, which I've been running for 27 years, is to create a compassionate Hollywood. And we have a rule, which is no discussion of politics, religion, or unions, because those are hot button issues. But everyone is welcomed, and I never ask what someone's politics are because I recognize. I mean, I'm liberal, but someone on the other side of the political spectrum can still be kind, can still, on a human level, be a good person. And so the moment we come under the tent with that understanding of actions, human actions, then we're fine. But Star Trek also allowed that. The original Star Trek said, there wasn't a political litmus test. I've met conservatives who love Star Trek. I've met liberals who love Star Trek. There was no, keep out sign to anybody if you understood that we all of us make the future a place we want to be in, and that's a day by day decision. So
Absolutely, and I love that. That was the one rule. Well, I had two rules in my comic store: you can't use the bathroom, and no politics. And
yeah,
and you're absolutely right because that's how the messages get across. I say it time and time again, and you know this, but this is for the audience.
yeah,
You want to get your message across, like, uh, you know, all you have to do is do it with compassion. You don't do it. You don't exclude anybody, and you
yeah,
write a good story, and you can get any message across you want, and people will be open to it. And that's why so many people watch Star Trek and learn from it.
yes. Well, that's also why I love science fiction because if you start talking about modern day issues, you're going to immediately polarize and you're going to have an argument. But with science fiction, you can talk about issues such as racism or anything, and you don't polarize. People actually have an open mind because it's taken out of the modern context, and that's why I love science fiction. It's great. I wouldn't choose any other genre. I'm very lucky to have always been a science fiction geek because if I had been writing procedurals or something or cop shows, who would care about my resume?
Yeah. Hey, and I am of the belief, just as a layman, that the two hardest things to write and create are comedy and science fiction.
Yes.
And I think because genre is so big right now, I think maybe the talent pool is maybe a little thinned out, and that's why we're getting procedural people writing science fiction. And what you just said, you need to immerse yourself in this. I've been a
Yeah.
lifelong geek and nerd since I
Yeah.
can remember, watching Batman and George Reeves Superman, and that's what brought in Marvel comic books, and it's not something. I mean, anybody's welcome. You're welcome to come in. Just take the time to learn the Star Trek lore. Like if you're working on Star Trek, maybe I don't know, watch some episodes of Star Trek.
Yes. Yeah. Well, also the other part is don't just imitate other TV shows. Well, Ray Bradbury was my mentor for over 10 years
Wow.
toward the end of his life, and it was a great honor. I'd go over once a month and just hang out with him at his house, and we'd talk, and it was wonderful. And Ray said, in terms of writing, he said, don't look outward, look inward. And I understood what he meant. It's like find out what you care about, what you know about, what you want to talk about. Have something that isn't just a copy of a copy of a copy. And so many TV writers, they're just writing stuff that's sealed within that hermetic world of other TV shows. And there's no, and you say, well, what's the truth here? What's the truth at the heart of this? And often there is no truth. When you ask what TV shows are about, like a given show is about, usually the answer is, well, it's about an hour.
Yep.
It's not about anything. It's not about anything at all. And so one has to be mindful, quality work doesn't come about by accident. You have to start with a high ambition to do something meaningful. And you don't want to lecture your audience. You don't want to be on a soapbox. I mean, Rod Serling's, best Twilight Zone episodes are the ones where he's not speechifying, where he's real inside character and inside story. But he was a passionate man, as was Roddenberry. They had a lot that they wanted to get across to their audience, and it really comes through. And certainly Ron Moore with Battlestar Galactica cared deeply, and he's very talented. And many of the people I came up with in the industry are incredibly talented, and they're the top writers in science fiction now, and deservedly so.
Now that whole group you were in, it's stars, absolute stars. So we're gonna wrap things up, but I want to end it, and I want to support you any way possible. I just love what you're doing. I love your passion. I've been a big fan of yours. So, Marc, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And
very welcome. I really enjoyed it, Gary. We'll talk again soon.
You take care of yourself. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
There it is. The Zicree cut has been released. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, I'm not that big on doing interviews. I have to really like the people, and I really like Marc Zicree. Of course, he wrote the Twilight Zone Companion. I still have my copy from my friend Doug that he gave me on my 12th birthday. So I've been a fan of this guy's for a long, long time. Now, not saying there won't be interviews ever again, but I got to really be into it. Like I said, maybe some Orville people, that would be cool. But yeah, usually it's just commentary here. But thank you again to Marc Zicree. Again, if there is another Kickstarter, I will support it. I am so sorry. And I will see you in the next video. Remember, not all who wander are lost. Thanks again, Marc Zicree.